Back in 2012, it was one of the biggest years of all time, especially in the film industry, when George Lucas decided to sell Lucasfilm over to Disney and hand over the keys to Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger for taking control of Star Wars from that point on, moving ahead with the sequels and the spin-off films like Rogue One and Solo. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future Star Wars updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you all so very much for the great and kind support. Now, given that over the years there's been pretty much a lot of up and down situations over at Lucasfilm, right? We know that right now, Jon and Dave are trying to salvage Star Wars. They are trying their absolute best to turn things around with the help of George Lucas, thankfully, and really just putting all of their time and effort into this franchise day in and day out. And that brings us to George Lucas and his true feelings about his stance on Disney Star Wars, where it's been, where it's going, and how this was all unveiled by a Hollywood producer, a big-time Hollywood producer that actually spoke to George Lucas not so long ago. Now, one thing that we do know about when it comes to the film industry is that Kathleen Kennedy even talked about this, that she made all these different promises to George Lucas that she felt that she had a change of heart over, that she needed to alter their deal and make things different for a lot of the upcoming films at the time and even some of the spin-off movies, right? So that brings us to exactly what happened. Now, we know that George Lucas has a lot of friends, people like Steven Spielberg out there, James Cameron, but one in particular that has been probably the most, I guess you could say, direct with the fans about his stance on The Last Jedi is, of course, Hollywood producer and director Ridley Scott. Now, Ridley Scott got to talk more about George Lucas's feelings on the Star Wars franchise, and with George Lucas, who has been more involved with Favreau and Filoni over the past couple of years, in an attempt to course-correct the franchise, Lucasfilm has been going under many changes as a company, thanks to Bob Iger allowing Jon and Dave to gain so many privileges at the company. However, recently George Lucas and his true feelings about Disney Star Wars recently spilled out thanks to Hollywood producer Ridley Scott. In a recent interview where he was being questioned about the Alien series, he eventually got on the subject of George Lucas. Ridley Scott went on to state the following: "I talk with George many times on and off throughout the years, and I had the opportunity to have an interesting chat with him that sort of caught me off guard, expressing his biggest concern and regret in his life having to do with selling Star Wars and Lucasfilm to Disney back in 2012. He hasn't been happy with Disney's approach on the films and has not been taking it well. He felt very betrayed by those like Kathy and the Disney executives, and I can confirm he really was very soul-crushed over what they did with Luke Skywalker and didn't take that too well after they promised to him that they weren't going to kill off his favorite character, Creation, in the middle film of the trilogy, and they did it anyway." So let me just pause right here for 1 second, alright? Now, Ridley Scott unveiling that this was actually something that George Lucas shook hands on with Kathleen Kennedy about the sequels, that they would not kill his favorite character in the sequels, Luke Skywalker, at least in the middle film, that they weren't going to do that, and they did it anyway. Now, if you guys don't know Ridley Scott, obviously you do, most of you do, but this guy is a legend when it comes to the film industry. I think that he is more respectable, to me at least, as a producer, and really kind of throws out common sense and states what needs to be said, you know, obvious things out there. And what I like about him so much is that he's very much, you know, direct with people. He doesn't really kind of play coy all the time or anything like that. But you guys may very well remember back in December of 2017, Ridley Scott really ripped Lucasfilm's approach to Star Wars, you know. He said a lot of different things, such as, you know, I think they like to be in control, and I like to be in control myself, Scott said back then. When you get a guy who's done a low-budget movie and you suddenly give him $180 million, he says, it makes no sense whatever, it's effing stupid, he says. You know what the reshoots cost and all. That's literally what Ridley Scott said. Go ahead and look it up. It was a very big interview. He really got very, you know, big into, you know, really kind of just putting Lucasfilm on full blast there. So, on top of that, we already know that Ridley Scott is trying to really just lay the groundwork here, telling fans exactly how George Lucas really feels, what he's going through, and that he feels he made the biggest mistake of his life. Now further, he goes on to say, listen, I have said this before and I will say it again. You don't hire an independent filmmaker to take on the role of a major blockbuster. I mean, you have a blockbuster, then you have blockbusters, right? Star Wars is that. It's something on a gigantic scale of profitability. He really felt like he made the biggest mistake of his life giving his work away and felt that he betrayed his soul doing so. But he's happy now that he's working with some of the most talented creators for where Star Wars is going, so I'm happy for him as of now. Now, you guys may or may not be aware, but basically what happened between Ridley Scott and his view on the sequels, it did actually kind of create a temporary, I guess you could say, moment in which a lot of other Hollywood producers were coming forward and revealing their true feelings about what Disney did to The Last Jedi and what they did to Luke Skywalker, stuff like that. There were quite a number of people out there in the film industry that were talking about this. Not just Hollywood producers, but a lot of directors, some writers out there were really kind of just putting Lucasfilm on full blast there. And so, I'm not all that surprised that this is the way that George feels. We already knew this. It's nothing super new, really. I mean, we knew how he felt behind the scenes and how he's been expressing things to John and Dave. But Ridley Scott is really putting it out there. And in preparation for, all these different things that Lucasfilm is going through, I'm sure that Lucasfilm doesn't really want to deal with all the bad press right now, especially with the whole Acolyte situation where you have Karen McCarthy suing Lucasfilm. I mean, it's just always a drama piece after the other, and it gets tiresome, right? So that's what I like about John and Dave, is that they're focusing on positivity, they're focusing on great ways of storytelling, and really just attempting to find ways to really turn Star Wars around. I mean, these guys are really overworked, both John and Dave. I mean, these guys, they're working day in and day out, around the clock, trying to hire other creators, this way they can kind of relax at least a little bit. But for now, they're working over 12 Star Wars projects at once, simultaneously. And that's a lot of, respect to them, I gotta give. So, yeah, I mean, Ridley Scott really just likes to say things, and tell it like it is, and that's exactly what he did, You don't really give an independent filmmaker all that money to make a movie, and just to let it fail on a not necessarily budget scale, or gross scale, I should say. It did make money, we all know that. But creativity-wise, it really divided the fandom, it damaged the fandom, it created a big split in the community, and that's not healthy, So, anyways, I'm very intrigued to hear what you guys have to say about all of this below in the comments. And if you guys did enjoy the content for today, fill me in below in the comments what you guys have to say about Ridley Scott, George Lucas, Kathleen Kennedy, etc. And I will catch you guys next time.
From night to moon we hear them moans again.